Hello, everybody. I never think about the government negatively, ever.
I pay my taxes on time.
I never think about how the IRS and federal government charge us between 10 and 30 times more on our taxes than they did when the Declaration of Independence was signed back a long time ago. I also never think about the magic bullet that came from an Italian piece of shit rifle that was fired in Dallas, Texas, that killed maybe the only president that ever meant well.
I believe that this nation should commit itself.
Holy
I also never think about, more recently, the CDC abandoning the town in California called Reedley after they discovered a Chinese biolab with a cheeky Ebola fridge in it.
The CDC then reached the conclusion that there was no evidence of select agents or toxins, and had state and local authorities destroy all the materials pursuant to court order.
I never think about any of that stuff.
And neither should you.
But today's video is about the Waco siege of 1993.
In 1993, Americans watched breathlessly as FBI agents faced off with a self-proclaimed religious prophet and his armed followers in Central Texas. This was the Waco siege.
It was a good old-fashioned American standoff. There's been a lot through our history.
February 28th, 1993, agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms arrived at the Mount Carmel compound armed with search warrants for the property and an arrest warrant for Koresh.
We've had the Wounded Knee standoff, 1975, not to be confused with the Wounded Knee massacre of 1890, which is horrible.
On February 27, 1973, about 200 AIM members came to the village of Wounded Knee and took over the trading post, museum, gas station, and several churches. Those involved in the takeover considered Wounded Knee of historical significance because of the 1890 massacre that occurred at the spot.
The Move standoff, where the government dropped a bomb on some American civilians, that's some insane shit.
And then the bomb was dropped. The house shook. It shook. And then we start feeling the heat and the smoke, which we knew wasn't tear gas. We knew there was a fire.
You got Ruby Ridge.
In 1992, a bloody standoff between lawmen and an armed white separatist named Randy Weaver left his wife, 14-year-old son, and a federal agent dead.
The 11-day siege at a place called Ruby Ridge, Idaho. It happened before Waco, and for many, it's an even bigger rallying cry.
And you got the Waco siege in 1993. All of these things have involved some kind of federal sheriff, marshals, police, something along those lines. And the way that these things happen and go down has always been of great interest to me. I am a bit of a fucking freak. And like I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the 1993 Waco siege of the compound owned by the Branch Davidians.
One of the things about being a Branch Davidian, and especially under David Koresh, was you're supposed to separate yourself from the world. The world is the sins, the flesh, the desires of the world.
A religious cult that started right here in my beautiful state of Texas that also resulted in one of the most insane domestic tragedies in American history. One of them. Today, we will be attempting to cover these events with accuracy and respect. Although it is important to note that I am a piece of shit idiot and I will absolutely make light of something that I shouldn't make light of, and it's complex and I have a 7th grade understanding of logic and politics. And while we'll be doing our best to dig deep into these complexities, there is so much information and so much perspective that if you truly want to understand what's going on, I suggest you do your own research. That's what I suggest. Generally, you should just do your own research and not listen to the talking internet man. There's a lot of pieces of media out there that'll give you some valuable insight outside of just ours. If you've ever heard of Waco, Texas, you probably think of Dr. Pepper, because that's where Dr. Pepper's from. The first Dr. Pepper bottling plant was in Waco, Texas. The second was in Dublin, Texas. They shut it down. Dublin, Texas, they still made it for a little while. There was a Dr. Pepper called Dublin Dr. Pepper. It's pretty fucking rogue. I kind of want to do a video on it one day, honestly.
About 65,000 people per year visit Dublin Dr. Pepper Museum and Soda Shop. They get not only a taste of the soft drink, but a taste of history as well.
They got in trouble from Big Doc, and they shut him down. Waco, though, Dr. Pepper. Other than that, you probably know it because of the Waco siege and the Branch Davidians, the crazy motherfucker David Koresh that ran that right into the ground. Before we get too deep into the story, we need to learn about the Branch Davidians. This is way before David Koresh. In fact, 58 years before the events of Waco. not 58 years before the events of today, 1966, April 30th. We gotta go all the way back, baby, to the original founding of the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists by a fella named Victor Houteff. Who's Victor Houteff? This guy. He looks like every other guy from the 1930s, so there's not much there that's special about him. And I suppose you could go even further back to 1863 when the Seventh-day Adventist Church was founded. They were starting all kinds of crazy shit back in the 1800s. Joseph Smith was the first iPad baby. Spread the rumor. It's true. I swear to God.
Joseph Smith was called a prophet. Dum 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 dum.
All that nonsense well beyond the scope of what's important in today's video, though. So, let's move on. You've probably heard of Seventh-day Adventists and the difference between them and other denominations of Christianity. There are not that many differences on the surface level, and a lot of Seventh-day Adventists will reiterate that there isn't much of a difference. This guy named Sean, a Seventh-day Adventist, wrote an extensive article on Substack of all what he thought that made the Seventh-day Adventism different from Christianity, regular Christianity. Sixth day, or is it first day? Sabbath? I don't know. I'm a little rusty. This fella Sean believes that God is love. He says that few Christians really let that idea soak in. And Christians often promote ideas that are contrary to that basis of love, which I think is extremely based and red-pilled. A woman named Sherry, another Seventh-day Adventist that we found on Quora, the greatest source of all time, she shared how they're believers of the same things as Christianity generally. I mean, look at this. It's pretty much. Saturday is the Sabbath. Dead people are dead, but sleeping until Jesus comes back. Huh? The devil exists. And he's a woman named Sniper Wolf. Do not start. Good girl. It's early. It's early right now, so she's not yapping. She's not yapping. I drugged her. I've pumped her full of fentanyl. Just kidding. I didn't do that, just in case you had to have me fucking clarify, by the way. Old regular-looking 1930s fella Victor felt that the Seventh-day Adventist had become. I said begum. They had become lax in their practicing of their religion and their devotion to God as a result of that. Victor called for a reformation of the Seventh-day Adventists, and they became the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, or members of the Shepherd's Rod. That was their other name, the Rod. Then Waco, Texas came into picture shortly after with the purchase of a 189-acre plot of land that was purchased very close to Waco in Mount Carmel. This beautiful center was created and housed approximately 125 branch Davidians. These Davidian folks have a gilded age of prosperity, and then eventually there's a fracture, as every great church eventually does. They fracture. This big old fracture happened after Victor died in 1955 and immediately after O.J. Simpson was born. I guess they say reincarnation is real. Did you guys hear he murdered that lady? Some crazy shit. Also, he was born in 1947, not 1955. I was just trying to make a joke. After Victor died, there was a power vacuum amongst the Davidian Adventists, and there was a battle for control. That's awesome. Very healthy behavior for a church. Victor's wife, Florence, she took control and convinced the executive council, because the church has an executive council, to replace the sitting vice president with herself. Here's Victor and his wife. Here's Florence. She looks very 50s-y. Yeah, these people look, they look like they belong in the times. It wasn't all sunshine and roses, though. Florence had to battle with this guy named Benjamin Roden. The shepherd's rod was in a mess. Benjamin even said that God revealed to him that the Davidian Adventists needed a new leader. There should be a new leader, and the claims were obviously refuted by Florence because she just took control. I don't know if this guy looks like Shrek or like what's going on here. I'm not sure what exactly. I don't know if it's just the angle of the photo or what, or if this guy's been fucking hard maxing. Eventually, Florence prophesied that on April 22nd, 1959, God's kingdom would return, with signs beginning as early as 1955, like it's some kind of meteorological prediction. Roden, Benjamin, he rejected this prophecy, and obviously signs never appeared of that, and Florence's prophecy was discredited almost immediately, and that would fracture the shepherd's rod once again, guys. Some within the rod turned to Benjamin at this point because he was the counter king. He was the brute. The newest splinter group of the shepherd's rod, the Branch Davidians, led by Ben Roden, would emerge. A family man, a wife named Lois. That's my mom's name. My dad's name's Peter. They also had a son, Stewie. Just kidding. His name was George. Ben eventually died, as all great men do, and Lois would take over everything and fuck it all up. Lois would focus her teachings around the fact that the Holy Spirit was a woman, and that the church was a place for co-dominion with men and women, equality. Kind of an interesting idea. During this time, Lois was with a young, incredibly handsome and talented man much younger than herself, a man by the name of Vernon Howell. Vernon Howell would eventually rename himself to David Koresh.
This was David Koresh when we first met him in an exclusive interview back in 1987. At the time, he was known as Vernon Howell, and he was involved in a deadly dispute for control of the Branch Davidian sect.
Lois was 67 years old and David was 23 at the beginning of the relationship. What the f? And that's before Discord. He got groomed hard. By the way, this bad motherfucker is George Roden. And both George and Vernon, aka David Koresh, would try to claim the throne. They would both seek to become the leaders of the Branch Davidians, with George ultimately winning and expelling David Koresh, aka Vernon, and his followers at gunpoint. Very Texas. I like this. It's heating up already. This is cool. This is cool. And from this point on, the two would basically politically campaign against one another. George called Koresh a warlock, which is awesome. He cited an inverted cross upon his chest.
George says you're a warlock and that you have the sign of an upside down cross on your chest, and that's the sign of a warlock. You've studied Satanism.
And Koresh called George a madman and wrote songs about him. This is so fun. There's a battle between good and evil. There's a madman in Waco, Texas.
Please, 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 won't you listen? It's not what it appears to be. You didn't want to hurt anybody. Just let our old people free.
I'm gonna be honest, David Koresh is not that bad of a musician. The guitar playing, that's pretty good. He's pretty fucking solid. And on that little minor, the minute, what the f?
Please, 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 won't you listen? It's not what it appears to be.
I might have followed this guy, TBH. They say, you know, that there's the whole, like, never mind. I'm not even gonna bring that up in this fucking video. I'm gonna get in trouble. I'm gonna get in trouble one of these days, guys. You wanna watch me say shit that'll get me in trouble? Go to gump.club. And also go to sour.gg and buy some fucking licorice that we make. We hand make it. We piss all over it and shit in it. How do you think it gets so sour? We should have some new flavors pretty soon, I think. Maybe even a new product before you know it. I love this though. The guy's, he's an interesting looking guy, pretty charismatic. David Koresh singing about George, his rival, his Branch Davidian rival.
There's a madman living in Waco. He's bowing his knee to bear. Won't you help, Mr. Sheriff? So we won't fail.
There's a madman living in Waco. He's almost... That's so good, dude. I cannot believe that is David Koresh. There's a madman. Yeah, there is. There is, and it's ironic. In all honesty, it's fucking ironic. All this shit is just so funny to me. This is the most 80s thing ever.
28-year-old David Koresh sang of a madman living in Waco, a song made more bizarre by what's happened in the last 2 days. At the time, he was describing George Roden, his rival, in a battle for the hearts and minds of a tiny religious sect called the Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventists.
Excuse me, David. Your rival George says you're a warlock. Care to comment? And in fact, let me pick up my guitar. There's a madman living in Waco, and his name is George. And Peter and Lois were his mom. Also, I keep mentioning Waco. Waco is definitely a focal point, but they lived all around. David Koresh, or Vernon at that time, lived in Palestine, Texas, lived in a couple different spots in California. They moved all around. Eventually, his goal was to lead his men to Jerusalem and fight Babylon, the Babylonians, which would be the ATF, I think, but we'll get into it more. This rivalry between David and George would eventually, as you might expect, turn violent, and 8 of Koresh's followers would attack George. There were news reports of a gunfight.
Back in November of 1987, 8 heavily armed Koresh followers in battle fatigues advanced on a desolate church compound called Rodenville, just outside of Waco, Texas. they're met by a gun-toting preacher named George Roden.
Me and my little autistic buddies when I was a child, we used to pretend we go, hey, shut the fuck up. I'm just shooting a fake M60, all right? All right, this isn't real. It's not real. Jesus Christ. God, I love that, by the way. Man, Rodenville, they had a town called Rodenville, and all these people are running around in fucking marine fatigues. M81, what the hell is going on? This surely has to be a recreation, and if so, that's embarrassing.
When the smoke clears, George Roden is rushed to the hospital with a flesh wound. The 8 suspects are rushed off to jail. The charge, attempted murder. More than a dozen high-powered guns and hundreds of rounds of ammunition are seized.
So, what caused this feud? Why do these guys hate each other so much other than just wanting to be in power? Well, there was a divine test in which they would both attempt to resurrect the corpse of a person George had dug up from an unmarked grave. And whoever were to successfully resurrect the body would be the true prophet and leader of the Branch Davidians. This is in the 80s, by the way.
Roden dug up the casket from an unmarked grave a year earlier and reportedly challenged David to a divine test. Both men would try to raise the woman from the dead. Whoever brought her to life was the true prophet.
Yeah, challenge him to a divine test. That seems healthy. That seems like healthy behavior out in Waco. I would rather stick with Dr. Pepper. This is some 1200 shit. This is some Dark Ages shit. What the fuck was going on in Waco in 1993 or 1987? What the fuck? David was grumpy about all this stuff. He wanted George to get charged.
David asked the sheriff to charge George for vandalizing a grave, but the sheriff said he needed pictures of the actual body. So David went back to the scene equipped with a camera, army fatigues, and an arsenal of guns.
David really seems like a very please, like a really manipulative kind of, he's kind of a bitch a little bit. He's like a little bit of a, is it just me or does David Koresh seem like a fucking bitch? So now you got these crazy motherfuckers digging up corpses for divine tests to see who the true prophet of God is. And on top of that, you got Koresh and his followers opening fire on George in Rodenville, and they all face charges of attempted murder, but none of those charges stuck. They were freed. Even stranger,
the bitter struggle between George Roden and David Koresh, which first brought David Koresh to national attention on a current affair, had a bizarre ending. The charges against Koresh and his followers didn't stick, and they were all freed and the charges dropped.
God, very bizarre. Even stranger, Koresh and his men were able to take control of Mount Carmel, Rodenville, the George Roden epic church with the fucking corpse in it, with the Jewish flag over it. And how they were able to do this is because George had thousands of dollars in unpaid taxes for the Mount Carmel ranch, the Mount Carmel cult land. Koresh and his bros raised up the money, paid it, and then claimed the property. That seems kind of really evil. That seems kind of like a dick move. Now that old David, or Vernon, I guess at this point, had control, he would change his name from Vernon to David to indicate his ties to biblical figures like King David, and Koresh to indicate his ties to the man who freed the Jews during the Babylonian captivities. Babylonian. Babylon. I don't know, dude. Shit. This seems really seeming crazy, though. This is seeming like some wacky shit. But honestly, I get it. Every great performer needs a great stage name, okay? I mean, Caleb Phelps is not my real name. My real name is, Dickie Rhubarb. Or sorry, Donnie Rhubarb. That's it. Donnie Rhubarb. Make sure to leave some hate comments down below. Maybe it's just me, but judging by the challenge of trying to raise a corpse from the dead and having gunfights in 1987 in Waco, Texas, things are getting pretty fucking fanatical. Guys, the trend towards fanaticism would truly just continue. Koresh dubbed himself, or was dubbed, the Messiah of Waco. This stemmed from claims that he was the Lamb in Revelations 5. That's right, that Lamb. Okay. Quite literally the Lamb. I mean, that's the fucking greatest lamb you could be. Second only to the chop. The Messiah of Waco. This lamb claim, incredibly important. To understand the Revelation 5 claim to lamb that David Koresh was implicating himself in, Revelation 5 told of an angel seeking someone worthy enough to break the 7 seals and open the scroll, which was the visualization of God's truth. Basically, just to be a true arm of God. Open its seals. It's kind of a big deal, in all honesty, to fanatics, I think. There's a report from 1993 as well of David referring to himself as this Lamb of God. He really thinks he's the Lamb of God. And I feel like I maybe have heard someone else being the Lamb of God. Who is Lamb of God? God. Oh, it's Jesus. I'm just kidding. That's funny though. Bro is quite literally the Messiah of Waco.
There's a madman living in Waco.
Not good. Not good. All this very, very, very bad. And things in Koresh's past would eventually compound to this point in very worrying ways. He had a tendency towards violence that was evidenced by his attack on George Roden, his rival and brother-in-law, or son-in-law, or son or something. I don't know. That's weird. Speaking further to that, his proclivity towards gigantic, bizarre age gaps in relationships, evidenced by his sexual history with George's mother, Lois, after the death of George's father, Peter. Dude's a freak. All right? So yeah, kinda odd. More of his sexual hungers would come through and become obvious in the way that he would warp his teachings and how he would take on a bunch of wives and tell these wives that they were chosen by God to be his next wife. Some of them, by the way, underage, not nearly as large of an age gap as his age gap with Lois, but still, you know, pretty substantial age gaps. You got one former wife talking about how she was chosen.
I was his wife. He explained it this way, is God would tell him which one. So God would be choosing them. So in essence, God chose me. That's how each woman thought, is I was chosen this time.
Wow, very manipulative. What an asshole. Just kidding, I'm jealous. When I tried that shit, it didn't work. Even more gooberish on top of that, David would marry a mother and her daughter. God!
These two women were both married to one of the most notorious men in the news today, Waco cult leader David Koresh. Not only were they both a part of his harem, Janine and Robin Bonds are also mother and daughter.
These two women were both married to, and then cuts to Oprah with her veneers and Ozempic face, horse maxing.
Robin had a son with David Koresh named Sean, and her mother Janine believes that her former lover is not the evil man that he has been made out to be.
Is it just me, or do they seem really dumb, the people who would marry this guy? Like, looking from the outside in, you know, I get it. I understand there's like levels of psychology. There's all sort of syndromes to explain this kind of bizarre behavior. People can be manipulated. We are butt creatures. We are butt animals, okay? And this guy's like the fucking Messiah, allegedly the Lamb of God, allegedly according to Revelations 5, or I guess according to him, not according to not according to Revelations 5. So I do get it, but at the same time, kind of stupid. Kind of stupid. To a far more disturbing note, at 1:54 in this clip, Kiri Jewel, Koresh's youngest wife, talks about him sleeping with fucking children, which is disgusting.
It was common for David to sleep in a bed with women and children. Sometimes I fell asleep in his room after meeting, or maybe I'd fall asleep on his bed watching MTV. I didn't even think about it because the women and girls were all David's wives, or would be, and many of the kids were his too. I've slept together with him and my mom and Lisa Ferris. I've slept with him and Aisha Garifas. Aisha was older than I was. She was probably 13 when I was 6 or 7. She became one of David's wives when she was 14 and had a baby for him. Once she was pregnant, I never saw her. She was kept hidden because she wasn't an adult.
So basically, David Koresh is a freak, insane, fanatical pedophile. It seems like. David Koresh had a 10-year-old bride. Okay, that's not good. Shit's really fucking ramping up, guys. We're establishing all the basic tenets of pure insanity. We've got underage brides, we got self-proclaimed messiahs, we've got all sorts of shit. Time to start stockpiling weapons, right? As any logical fanatic would do. David and his followers would begin stockpiling semi-automatic weapons that they converted to fully automatic weapons, which is illegal. You can't do that. And also, they began stockpiling homemade grenades. It's theorized that a lot of the stockpiling began, or at least ramped up heavily, after the standoff at Ruby Ridge in 1992. There was an anticipation of a final battle in which the world would end, and it was a giant battle between the faithful and the beast of Babylon, which was the US government, the ATF, I don't know, the FBI. It's ridiculous. Skipping ahead a little bit to show you guys how many weapons they actually had. They had over 130 firearms, over 200,000 rounds of ammunition, and grenade launcher-like attachments. Wow. 700 magazines. They were fucking stockpiled. That is a lot of illegal firearms.
One day, a delivery man for UPS delivered a box of grenades to David Koresh, and the box broke open.
When the sheriff's office received this information, we shared it with ATF. You start wondering about what is this all about? And you start thinking about the automatic gunfire reports that you'd had a year or two earlier. And you're wondering what exactly is happening out there.
There's also some wild footage of this weaponry and this armament.
David Koresh preached from the very beginning that he wanted to militarize his followers. And he started going to gun shows and purchasing huge amounts of weaponry, ammunition.
He thought that the end of all time, the end of the world would come in a great battle between the faithful and the beast of Babylon, who he specifically identified as the government of the United States of America.
Guy's a bit wild. I bet he took advantage of the gun show loophole, that popular talking point. Coupling a gigantic stockpile of illegal weapons and more reports of child abuse within the Branch Davidian compound at Mount Carmel, eventually you're going to have the biggest kiss of the law slap down on you, aka David Koresh and his followers. The beast of Babylon is coming. I mean, check out the Waco affidavit. There was a lot of bad shit coming out of Waco. A very special agent known as Davy Aguilera created an affidavit detailing the reasons the ATF should get involved at Waco. It all centered around the belief that the Waco folk were unlawfully manufacturing machine guns and explosives. That is what the big thing was. Same with Ruby Ridge, sawed-off shotgun. It's happened many times before. Illegal weapons get the ATF involved, and then people die. Fairly ironically, the affidavit details a extremely special agent that went undercover and spoke to David, and it told how David believed in the right to bear arms and that the government was going to take that right away. Specifically, he called out the ATF as an agency that violated the constitutional rights of gun owners, and he said how the ATF would allow you to have one thing legally, and then combination of one thing with legal thing makes illegal, right? So like buying full auto sear is not illegal. Buying Glock switch, not really illegal, but using sear and using Glock switch on weapon, very illegal. Crime. In the modern day, this happens with short-barreled rifles and these things called braces. You can have a pistol brace right here on this gun, and this is legal, but if you make this pistol brace into a stock, it magically becomes illegal and you can be prosecuted with that. So this guy Rodriguez was undercover, man, and David Koresh was a boogaloo guy. Not good, very bad. It also reminds me of those oil solvent traps that you can buy on the TikTok shop or Temu that are 100% just fed items. You buy it and it's like, oh, it's just an oil solvent trap. That's fine. I'm not going to use that as an illegal suppressor or anything like that. And that's the ATF will knock down your door and blow your dogs away. Specifically my dogs, Donnie Rhubarb. I mean, David Koresh here. David Koresh and extremely special agent Rodriguez.
This is extremely special agent Rodriguez. This is extremely special agent Rodriguez. And this is David Koresh.
Just kidding. It's Petey and Frankie, and Peter is a griffin. So, Peter Griffin. Get it? Just in case you are an idiot and you couldn't foresee what's about to happen, the ATF decided to use the affidavit to obtain a search warrant and an arrest warrant for Koresh and some specific followers. Okay, they had an undercover guy. I mean, they really went hog wild on this fella. Holy shit! And all of this was predicated on the belief that the Branch Davidians were tampering with receivers and creating fully automatic assault guns. The warrant that was granted to the ATF was to be carried out on or before February 28th, 1993. This, once again, is another inflection point in which things get real crazy. Post-fanaticism, post-special agent. The ATF made another claim that David Koresh was essentially Walter White. They had reason to believe that he was making meth on the property at Mount Carmel as well, which gave them reason to contact the DEA and DOD and work with them and really create the ultimate trifecta of just the Babylon beast. Good versus evil here, guys, or maybe evil versus evil. Maybe. I'm not sure. How'd they figure this out? Well, they didn't contact Jesse Pinkman, and he didn't squeal on Walter White. It was because people bought chemicals in glassware, and some of the resins had prior drug involvements, and the National Guard used thermal imaging to find a hot spot in the compound. Pretty awesome. The raid was set to begin originally March 1st, 1993, codename Showtime, but they had to move the date forward because the local Tribune wrote an article called The Sinful Messiah on February 27th, and they had to move that up to the 28th and match with their original search and arrest warrants. The ATF supposedly told the paper to delay that post or just stop it entirely, but it was too late, and they posted that shit, and I cannot imagine what David Koresh was thinking when he wrote this. If you are a Branch Davidian, Christ lives on the threadbare piece of land 10 miles east of Waco called Mount Carmel. I do not have a 9th grade education. Damn. David Koresh. Not sure why it was originally set for March 1st. Maybe that was a lie just in case there was any moles, but they definitely didn't want this article to come out because it would probably make the people within the compound a bit nervous and a bit trigger happy, potentially. If I saw myself in this paper and this was written about me, I'd be tweaking. Holy. Please see cult, page 10A. Oh, claim the divine right to take every man's wife. That is pretty bold. At least 15 so-called wives. Abuse children physically and psychologically. Maybe he should be strung up. Maybe he should have been drawn and quartered.
Just this weekend, the Waco Tribune-Herald unveiled reports that were 8 months in the making. Its investigation into the Branch Davidians reveals complaints that leader Vernon Howell abused children physically and psychologically, has had 15 so-called wives, and claimed divine right to take every man's wife.
Taking a bit of a step back here, I'm really confused as to why the ATF is making claims of stuff like this. They have the belief that all this stuff's happening. I don't know where they got this information or what exactly was going on, but the ATF generally doesn't have to do with cults that much. It's just like weapons. It's a very confusing story. I'm not on the side of David Koresh or the fucking lunatics that made up the Branch Davidians in Mount Carmel, Waco, Texas, to be honest. But I'm also not really on the side of the ATF. Not really, generally speaking. They like killing people a lot, and we'll get into that. And finally, on Sunday, February 28th, 1993, the ATF tried their best to use their search warrant to gain access to the Waco compound, but there was a slight issue. A KWTX TV reporter, one of these guys right here, who was tipped off about the raid, asked directions from a U.S. Postal Service worker, and that guy, coincidentally, was the brother-in-law of David Koresh, and he sped to the compound and warned everyone that there was a raid about to go down, and they all obviously locked down. So big flub there. Flubber, my favorite movie. Just kidding. So David Koresh, now informed at some point, there's sort of a dispute as to whether or not he knew before that or whatever, but he definitely knew right before this was going to happen. He knew that they were about to get raided by the ATF. He begged the undercover ATF agent there, Robert Rodriguez, who also knew the raid was going to happen, and pleaded for them to call off the raid. Rodriguez played ignorant and asked what the f he was talking about, and then later found an excuse to leave the compound. And Robert reported when he left, everyone was praying. They began to pray. So David Koresh knew, and the ATF knew that David Koresh knew, and they still decided to go in. I mean, that's probably not going to be a good result. They were armed. Everyone was armed. It was not good. It was bad. It was quite bad. Koresh ordered all of his male followers to arm themselves and prepare to take up defensive positions, etc., because this is the beast of Babylon coming, and they need to fight the battle of good and evil. They are the followers of the Lamb. So all the men prepared and the women and children took cover. Koresh stated that he would try and talk to the ATF to get them to stop before any lives were taken, but the ATF had quite set intentions, and they arrived in a convoy of civilian vehicles armed to the teeth. I mean, it was military. It was the military type beat. These are MP5s and M16s and shit. Look at this guy here. He's got a riot shield hiding behind a tin can with his pistola. What kind of agent is he? ATF agent. Look at him ready to arrest people. You guys didn't want to arrest him. You wanted them all to die or something. Allegedly. I actually don't know, by the way. Just being a fucking cringe edgelord. So the standoff officially began. David Koresh exited the compound with his hands raised above his head and said that there were women and children in there, and there was a back and forth, trying to diffuse the situation as one might do when one's trying to protect their own cult. Somebody fired a shot, though. Nobody knows who exactly fired the shot, I feel like it was probably, I don't know. If I had to say, judging by this video of the director of the ATF trying to disassemble a Glock, I would say maybe it's the ATF, because the ATF doesn't necessarily hire based on merit. Only God knows, all right? Maybe the Lamb of God knows. But that triggered a fucking gunfight. David Koresh got shot in the stomach and hand, and he retreated, ducked back inside of his compound. And by God, shit started to go down, I tell you what.
During the initial volley of gunfire at Koresh in the doorway, he was hit as he retreated inside. Several bullets whizzed past him, hitting others as well, including his father-in-law, Perry Jones, who would pass away a few hours later.
Helicopters from the Army National Guard began low flying to draw fire from the compound. Draw fire maneuver, fire, draw fire, draw fire. Aggravating assets to the left, to the right. Fun fact, during the first shots, a Davidian known as Wayne Martin called 911 to inform the police that they were being shot at by feds, and there were women and children in the building. He pled for them to call it off multiple times.
The first FBI agents on the scene listened to frantic 911 calls between a deputy sheriff and one of the Davidians.
Wayne. If they don't back up, we're going to have to swing them off. Just remain calm. We're going to get it worked out, okay?
The gunfight had lasted nearly an hour.
But alas, that didn't happen.
Hello? Hello? Yeah, this is Lieutenant Lynch. May I help you? Yeah, there's 75 men around our building, and they're shooting at us in Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel? Yeah, tell them there are children and women in here and to call it off. All right. Hello? I hear gunfire. Oh, shit. Hello? Who is this? Hello? Call it off! Who is this? Hello?
And thus begins a fucking tragedy. We have a lot of national tragedies, to be honest. The first non-Koresh casualty was an ATF agent who was shot around the back of the building. He was shot, he was wounded. This led to the ATF changing their stance to be a bit more aggressive. They took fire and fired into the buildings. They set up ladders to get onto the roof. They wanted to take out hostiles and go grab weapons that they believed were being stored there. Look at them climbing on that thing, like little apes. This guy is insanely lucky. I've seen this footage so many times, and these are bullets coming out of the building as far as I'm aware. He's just like fucking dancing around that window. I assume there's someone over here. And this guy, I mean, that looks like he just got shot, but he didn't, I suppose. I don't know. Pretty fucking insane though. Man, shoo. We got to give him a break though. All right, these guys, they're fucking flipping and flopping around, but it's the first fight they had against adult men and not children or dogs. So a bunch of agents climbed into the building. They threw a stun grenade in there. They got shot. A couple of them died. A bunch of people got shot. It was fucking terrible. Overall, there was a lot of loss of life. I would say completely unnecessary loss of life, but they say hindsight is 20/20 and a broken clock still right twice a day. Or whatever. Yeah, right, Frankie. Everything that occurred within the building once the ATF gained entry through the windows, there's no video of that. We just have video of the exterior, but an agent fired a shotgun, killing a Davidian, and discovered a cache of weapons nearby, where that agent was then shot and killed. 2 more agents were wounded and then escaped from that, and a 3rd agent laid covering fire and killed another Davidian. Time goes on, quid pro quo, more Davidians and agents were killed. But that's what happens when you start a gigantic gunfight. People die. 45 minutes after showtime, gunfire began to slow a little bit. So it was quite literally a 45-minute fucking battle at Mount Carmel in Waco, Texas. Insane. This is Texas. This is Texas. This is domestic soil. It's just like a lot of unreasonable people meeting each other, and then just fucking, that's what happens. Just a lot of explosions and death and shooting and holy shit. So the gunfire slows down and eventually ceases after about 45 minutes to an hour. What is the reasoning? It's not an agreement or the amount of deaths or destruction. It's because the ATF ran low on ammunition.
The ATF claims that the tragic loss of life lay at the hands of the cultist and David Koresh, as they claim that they were ambushed on arrival.
And then they completely ran out of ammunition. A ceasefire was eventually given. The Branch Davidians allowed the ATF to gather their dead and wounded and withheld their gunfire. I don't know why they did that or what exactly was happening. It's not good. 16 ATF agents were injured and 4 were killed, and 5 Branch Davidians were killed and multiple injured, unknown injured, and that included David Koresh. The Branch Davidians even began to bury their dead on the property. Shortly after going back inside, another Branch Davidian was shot, a guy named Michael Schroeder. He supposedly fired a pistol at agents after re-entering the compound, but that was never confirmed. Once again, only God knows, and that made it 6 Davidians dead on February 28th, 1993. It's crazy that they let him just go out and bury their dead. It's like wild, man, during the great battle of their time. This whole thing is really confusing to me and doesn't really make a lot of sense from either side. In my opinion, it's weird that there's even a right or wrong here that you have to look for. It should be, I feel like, pretty clear as day. There's a lot of complexity here, like I mentioned in the very beginning, and some additional complexity. According to this fella, Alan A. Stone's report, he stated that the Branch Davidians did not ambush the ATF. They were not trying to maximize their kills. Instead, they were just desperately defending their sacred ground to what they believe eventually achieve salvation. They performed what's called defensive violence. And that does make sense, because I don't feel like these people were necessarily that dangerous to anyone outside of people in the compound. Not that it didn't need to be dealt with, because there's a lot of abuse and f***ed up shit going on in there, as far as we know. But at the same time, didn't need to start shooting at them all the time, a bunch for an hour and stuff. So that is the end of day 1. The FBI comes in due to the federal agents dying and this issue becoming something very, very, very serious.
The FBI was unaware of the gathering crisis in Waco that would soon consume the Bureau. They were focused on New York, where the World Trade Center had just been bombed.
Somebody tried to blow up the World Trade Center.
5 dead, 1,000 injured.
The magnitude of the explosion.
Biggest terrorist attack in U.S. history.
What's shocking is that the ATF lost their element of surprise, and they were not even supposed to continue the raid, but they just ignored that sort of basic strategy and process, that operating procedure, and then they just began an assault that resulted in a bunch of their own men dying and also the Davidians dying. Thus begins day 2, the FBI siege of Waco, and also negotiations. That's a very important difference. We got a little bit of negotiations here with the FBI, which is good.
Over the duration of the 51-day standoff, there were a total of 754 calls between authorities and the Branch Davidians, usually by Koresh or Snyder. The FBI would also use the daily press briefings to communicate to those in the compound as well.
Their approach was quite a bit different than the ATF. Instead of just shooting a lot of people and just trying to draw fire and shoot more people, they established a connection, a communication connection with David Koresh from inside the compound. Koresh stated that he would leave the compound peacefully. Unfortunately, God was in Koresh's ear, who told him to stay and wait. But it did allow multiple children to leave the compound, 5-month-old children to 12-year-old children, only 19 of them. There was quite a few more. There were still 98 more people within the compound. And by the way, interviews between the FBI and the children gave the FBI reason to believe that they were indeed abused sexually, physically, emotionally within the compound, and that will lead more to what we're going to talk about later. All in all, though, things are not looking good. Tensions are still high as shit, and out of this, 2 sides developed within the FBI. One side believed that negotiation was the only way to go forward, and the other side believed that the ATF tactic was the only way to bring the Davidians out of their compound, being really aggressive. So they decided to resort to psychological warfare. They pointed spotlights at the windows to prevent people from sleeping. They broadcast sounds all night, jet planes, pop music, Buddhist chanting, and screams of rabbits being slaughtered.
Large lights were set up to shine inside the compound while speakers blared a barrage of ear-piercing sounds. The idea was to torture those within by not allowing them any rest of any kind. The negotiators were also barred from calling into the compound and only allowed to speak to the Davidians if they called out.
I couldn't find any of these, but Wendigoon has a video in which he's got the sounds. I don't know where the f he got them, but that's the only place I could find these sounds. Thankfully, these things are scary. And just in case you think at this point the FBI had it under control, the ATF or the DOD or the DEA, they didn't. The Army came in and they brought in Bradleys and Sevs. They literally brought in f***ing armored vehicles. They used these armored vehicles to crush perimeter fences and cars belonging to the Branch Davidians. They also interviewed David Koresh's mother, asking him what he would do next, asking her what he would do next.
What do you think he will do next?
He's not a violent boy. He's a very sweet boy. But somebody breaks in your dadgum home, that was his home, it wasn't no cult. Somebody breaks in your home, you got a right to shoot them. Would you want them to break in on you? No, you wouldn't.
Damn! She's spitting facts! Or something, I don't know, I'm not sure. I'm not so sure about the whole not being prone to violence thing with him and George. I mean, that guy is a little wild. There's definitely some red flags in the past of old Vernon, or the f his name was. Mini-Me from Austin Powers. Vern Troyer's that guy. Sad. I love Mini-Me. Yeah, kind of wild shit. The FBI also decided to cut off their water and power and force them to eat things like MREs and rainwater or whatever they had stored within their compound.
It was decided by the FBI, against the negotiators' advice, that the power would be cut for good that night. The negotiators argued that 2 people had come out and it would only hurt the process, but they were ignored because the approaching night was going to be the coldest thus far, and freezing them out was the FBI's preferred option.
This led to Koresh ordering a group of 11 people to leave the compound as well, and on April 14th, long time later, after all this shit went down, Koresh released a letter to his lawyer, which would be his last communication with the outside world. And this was his own interpretation of the Book of Revelation. I want the people of this generation to be saved. I am working night and day to complete my final work of the writing out these seals. I thank my Father. He has finally granted me the chance to do this. He will bring new light and hope to many, and they will not have to deal with me, the person. I will demand the first manuscript of the seals be given to you. Many scholars and religious leaders will wish to have copies for examination. I will keep a copy with me. As soon as I can see that people like Jim Tabor and Phil Arnold have a copy, I will come out, and then you can do your thing with this beast. What does that even mean? What does that even mean? The letter caused the FBI to scramble, and a lot of them said that this was just a delay tactic so Koresh could prepare for the final stand. And this leads to tear gas and fire attacks like fucking Pokemon. By the way, this will be hard to follow along, and I'm not exactly an expert of keeping on track. So there's a full chronology of events on Wikipedia with timestamps as to what happened when. Do my best though. On April 19th, the government began poking holes in the compound. Attorney General Janet Reno wanted an end to the standoff and ordered the FBI hostage rescue team to mount an assault or a raid. This was all approved by Bill Clinton. Here's footage of a tank driving into the building.
After a 51-day siege, federal agents bring it to an end by driving a tank straight into the compound. News networks from all over the world beam their live coverage to millions of households.
Here's footage of CEVs used to poke holes and breach the building. They then pumped tear gas into these holes to try and force the Davidians to leave the compound without having to open fire on them, because no shots were meant to be fired because it's been 50 days of a siege here. I feel like there's got to be some kind of reasonable ground to come to. I mean, it's the whole power of the government and just a little cult in Texas, a little small cult. Big cult, dangerous cult for sure, absolutely. But there's got to be a way to not have a bunch of people die, right? Well, no. The negotiation phone was thrown out the front door. And in that open front door that was poked open by armored vehicles, they started shooting a bunch of fucking grenades, gas grenades. After 6 hours of gas bombing, no Davidians left the compound. They were supposedly holed up in the concrete basement using gas masks. And at noon of this day, mysterious fires broke out simultaneously in different parts of the building. You can see fires burning here.
At one point, we were watching TV, and that's when the fires started.
We have what appears to be a fire going on right now, raging at the Branch Davidian compound.
And we were watching it live, and we were all aghast that that happened, and that, you know, all the military presence and everything that was happening there.
We can also see Koresh's grandmother watching the fires on TV. Poor old gal.
All Gene Halep could do was watch as the Branch Davidian compound burned to the ground. These pictures did not produce a lot of hope.
I really got my doubts. I really do. They do have a place in there that they're at, and it's going to be mighty hot.
Tremendous fire.
For nearly 2 months, Mrs. Halep kept watch over the compound in Waco, hoping to get a chance to speak to her grandson. While friends and family offer hugs and comfort today, Mrs. Halep wanted answers. She wanted to know why she never got a chance to help.
Out of all the inflection points for the Waco siege, this is the biggest inflection point because the fires are the beginning of the end. Like, this is the end. And a lot of people, conspiratorial people, believe that the tanks that were poking holes were also flamethrower tanks that were blowing flames into this building to burn it all down, which eventually led to the death of everyone. Literally everyone.
A second hole is made in the side of the building, and a third hole is made at the front door. What these tanks are doing in each picture is collapsing the inside stairwells. The following footage proves beyond any doubt that the tanks intentionally set the house on fire. It proves that the Branch Davidians were murdered. Watch carefully as the tank backs out of the house. You can see that this tank has a gas jet on the front that shoots fire. You can also see the fire quite plainly. The tank goes into the house twice, and each time as it backs out, the fire at the gas jets is plainly visible.
It's okay, guys. It's just a conspiracy. It's just a conspiracy. Really crazy conspiracy. By the way, Bill Hicks, that footage is publicly available on YouTube, and a lot of people just don't know about it. And a lot of the shit covering Waco, all the performatism over the last couple years, all the awesome documentaries that we had during COVID, they don't really talk about that all that much. During the fire, only 9 people left, and the rest were buried, suffocated, or shot, or just died in the fire. All in all, 76 people died as a result of all of this, the fire stuff, you know, post all the gunfire deaths. 76 people died. Okay, pretty crazy. And a large concentration of the bodies were found together in a bunker, all huddled together. It was terrible, dude. Some of their skulls were found fractured due to debris. Some had gunshot wounds, self-inflicted stab wounds, potentially mercy killings, suicides. I'm not exactly sure. Koresh also died as a result of a gunshot wound. Supposedly he was killed by Steve Schneider, his top aide, and then Steve killed himself after that. So yeah, ash, death, rubble. Everyone inside had been killed, and the FBI refused to take responsibility for any of it. Of course, the government just refused to take any sort of responsibility whatsoever, and they were just suicidal people. They were crazy, suicidal fanatics. The end. Nothing to look into beyond that at all. People who want to commit S-word, they do fight back, generally speaking, right? They do fight back. They do wear gas masks. They do attempt to self-preserve and survive tear gas being thrown their way. A lot of blame shifting. Very, very odd.
Those children are dead because David Koresh had them killed. There's no question about that. He had those fires started. He had 51 days to release those children. He chose those children to die.
Luckily for the government, the crime scene was ruined. The evidence was just missing. Kids couldn't fit in gas masks. People suffocated from CS gas, fire, whatever.
And I can just see those kids barfing, vomiting, screaming, because you can't possibly have a gas mask that'll fit a little kid.
Didn't their report say that gas masks don't fit on these babies?
That's correct.
And didn't they know that?
They should have known that.
And I feel like, regardless of who David Koresh is and who all these people are, he was no saint. Quite literally, who's not the lamb. He's just a fucking insane, fanatical weirdo. But there was a lot of people. He didn't murder as many people. He didn't commit as much death and trauma and evil as the FBI, ATF, DEA, and DOD and American government, Bill Clinton, AG, all these people are all complicit in this. Pretty wild. I feel like this might be a war crime. I'm not sure though.
Coincidentally, just a few months earlier in January of 1993, CS gas was banned from warfare by those who signed the UN's chemical weapons ban, which included the US, and Janet Reno had a whole stockpile of military gas that she was itching to get rid of.
Phone lines cut off, no attempt to put out the fires.
The thing that really concerns me is why the building was so totally destroyed afterwards. After the fire was out, there was no firefighting whatsoever attempted, and then the crime scene, and it was a crime scene, was totally, absolutely destroyed. I've seen this happen before.
There was also destruction of trajectory evidence. Man, what a big fucking needless tragedy. Am I right, fellow meme lords?
Did you see the FBI changing the crime scene in any way?
Yes, sir. As I'd said earlier and didn't get to finish the answer, they were moving the vehicles, which destroyed valuable trajectory evidence. And in the end, it turned out didn't matter because the
but it didn't seem to be standard operating procedure. You don't consider that standard operating procedure, do you?
Certainly not in any crime scene I've ever been on. No.
Last year we observed the 30th anniversary of the Waco siege, and there are quite a few people who don't want the ATF to murder children, and the ATF has kind of developed a bad reputation since the Ruby Ridge thing. All these little hiccups in their past. The FBI, let's not forget about the MOVE bombing in Philadelphia, where the FBI quite literally just bombed people, American citizens. Or we can just go back to Wounded Knee in the 1890s, longer time ago. But the government has a pretty consistent history of just being evil and then shifting blame. Allegedly. So where do you guys see it? Do you see it as the necessary disarmament of a violent domestic group with some unfortunate collateral damage in the form of a bunch of women and children and innocent people? Or do you think the government is just evil? Or is it a combination of both? Because that's kind of where I'm at, right? Like, it definitely, I don't want no insane fucking cult operating on my ground, but at the same time, it's like, maybe we need a better way to approach situations like that, maybe potentially, regardless of whether or not they're hurting people. They are hurting people, for sure. But, I mean, David Koresh didn't kill as many kids as the ATF, so if it's like a competition, I feel like one's more evil than the other if we're basing it on just numbers alone. So anyway, this whole situation, very, very, very strange. It's incredibly complex. I would love to know your guys' thoughts. Government organizations are not inherently bad. They're made up of regular people, obviously. There are plenty of good people in the ATF, but a lot of rules and laws and things like that, it just causes schisms. People aren't just organizations. People aren't just systems. They make up systems, but there's a lot more to it. And there's a lot of very viable criticism that is to be made against every single organization or system out there. So, by the way, the Branch Davidians are still around. They're not exactly associated with David Koresh. On their YouTube channel, it says, "We Branch Davidian SDAs aren't what most think. We aren't followers of David Koresh." You mean Jesus. You mean Vernon. All right? Why don't you follow Vernon? He was a sound, reasonable guy. It must be tough being this handsome young man, though. Holy shit, that must be tough. Oh, Trent Wild. He leads the scattered Branch Davidians. Seems like a nice guy, though. Much, much, much nicer than Vernon.